In the early 1980s, every company involved in technology wanted to do one thing, and that was to make a successful clone of the IBM PC. Today we're going to study one of the more unusual entries into that field, the Sanyo MBC. Just a quick reminder, if you like vintage computers and vintage technology, please like and subscribe. It's going to help us a lot as we grow, and also I encourage you to become a Vintage Geek member. You can do that on the website at vintagegeek.com. In 1982, the company Sanyo decided to make their entry into the personal computing space. It was a time when a lot of companies were in the race to build a successful IBM PC clone. The IBM PC and the PC XT were the quintessential business computers at the time, and everyone wanted a piece of that pie, especially because IBM's price point was so high, and it really made it difficult for a lot of businesses to get into that level of technology. Sanyo entered the scene in 1982, and they wanted to make a PC compatible that was under the $1,000 price point. They were able to do so with the Sanyo MBC 550 and some subsequent models, but they definitely had to make some compromises in order to make that happen. This machine is an example of a PC compatible that's not truly 100% compatible. There are some hardware differences here. It had to run its own version of DOS, but it is an interesting machine and an interesting entry into the PC clone field. One thing is the styling of the unit itself, which definitely stands out. It's got this kind of silver metallic coat over everything, which makes it look, I guess, a little bit futuristic for the time. And it also has a very small form factor case, which was unusual at the time as well. The PC itself was a large machine and pretty heavy, and with all the components loaded inside, especially a hard disk, would make it not very easy to carry around the workplace. The Sanyo unit is actually pretty compact. There were a few different models of the Sanyo MBC. They started out with the 550 and then later had the 555. One thing that stands out about our particular Sanyo is that it does have two floppy disk drives. The boxes of these units were labeled MBC 550-2, which tells me that this was designed to be a two-drive system. However, we also got with the original boxes in these, the original shell, which was supposed to go in the second drive slot, which actually would hold floppy disks for storage. So I'm not sure if someone actually upgraded this to the two-drive model. The two disk drives in our system are actually different. They're a slightly different color variation, which makes me think it was added after the fact. In any case, both drives do seem to function in this machine. Our system did come in its original boxes, and it came with the original monitor and keyboard. We have the monochrome version, although they did make a color version. To make the color version work, you actually had to have a special version of the operating system disk that would load specific drivers for that. We don't have that, and we don't have the color monitor, so I'm not terribly concerned, but it is interesting that they had to have an entirely different set of code to run just one difference in peripherals at the time. The Sanyo MBC computer came with an 8088 processor, similar to the IBM PC. The front is pretty basic. You just have a couple of floppy disk drives. There's a power switch at the far right-hand side of the front panel, and it's got kind of a nice feel to it. The monitor that came with this particular system is the Sanyo CRT30. It's a monochrome, kind of green monochrome monitor. It is lightweight, and it does fit very nicely on top of the actual MBC case. And then you have the Sanyo matching keyboard. The first thing I noticed about the keyboard is that, strangely, it comes with an extension cable to plug into the back of the machine. I'm not sure why they did this, because I've actually, during testing, had it plugged in directly without any extender at all, and you can still very easily put it around the front of the case. So I'm guessing that was just to accommodate if you wanted to put this in a different orientation, maybe place it differently on the desk. I'm not really sure. The keyboard, although it has a standard 5-pin DIN interface on it, is not XT compatible. So as I understand it, you cannot plug this keyboard into a standard IBM PC. It's a different protocol, and it will not work. There's one of the examples of the compatibility that was lost in the compromises that had to be made to make this under $1,000 system. The keyboard, I actually think, is one of my favorite pieces of this machine, though, because it has a lot of different features that you don't see on other keyboards. We've got these kind of strange function keys. Interestingly enough, the first 5 numbers are on the bottom side of the keyboard, and then the uppercase version is the 6 through 10, which I guess makes sense, but it kind of makes these a little bit crowded with the text on these keys. You also have your standard keyboard layout to the right of that. Looks like you've got a shift lock that will actually light up on the key. And then there's another key on the other side of the spacebar that I really don't know what it does, and it's just called Graph. It also has a illuminated button on it, and I'm not sure what that does. You've got some pretty standard keys on the rest of this, but when you get towards the right-hand side of the keyboard, one thing that we noticed right away is that the Enter key is really, really bulky on this keyboard. It's a full square for the Enter key with a giant arrow on it, and I have to admit, I kind of love that. It's a unique feature feature and it really stands out. We've had some people actually come through the museum lately that noticed that right away as well, so it must not just be me. The right-hand side contains the numeric keypad, which looks pretty standard. There's no set of arrow keys or any function keys in the middle like you would see on the PC or the PC XT. And there is a large red break button on the far right-hand side as well. I have to assume that would be to terminate basic programs, but I'm not sure. It could also be something like a Control-C in DOS, but I'm always a big fan of having a giant red key on the keyboard. Really looks like that panic button that everyone wanted to have at some point or another. Interesting keyboard. It has a nice feel to it. It's certainly not the click feel of the IBM Model M or anything like that, but it's a solid design, and I think for the under $1,000 price point, it's pretty respectable. Taking a look at the back of this unit, it's kind of interesting to me because this feels a little reminiscent of other kind of industrial electronics at the time. It doesn't feel like a PC compatible looking at the back plane. It looks more like an industrial PA amp or something. You've got a fuse holder over here next to the power cord and input port. One of the things that it seems like they copied from the PC versions was having a pass-through for the monitor to be able to power it directly off the CPU, and that is shown here. There's actually a power outlet on the back that is switched with the computer, so you could plug the monitor right into that. Then you've got your other ports on the back. There is a 25-pin connector that simply says line, and I'm not sure what that was for. We did get with this system an RS-232 module that looks like it was not installed in the system. If you're familiar with it, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. There's a Centronics type parallel port on this that I assume you could use a standard printer with, and you've also got your standard monitor output. The monochrome output is a standard RCA connector, and that goes directly to the monochrome input on this particular monitor. There's also a multi-pin connector for the color monitor, so apparently the hardware was available for both designs. You just had to have a different piece of software if you were going to use the color version. I don't know if that particular color protocol is compatible with other designs, maybe like the Commodore style and some of the other color graphics adapters that we've seen. We'll have to do a little bit more research on that one. And finally, you have the keyboard connector, which, as I mentioned, is a standard 5-pin connector, but it is not XT compatible. We will not be trying to plug in our IBM keyboard into this today. As for the monitor itself, it just has a standard composite RCA input, and it has 4 adjustments on the back, so nothing really too special here, but it seems to be a good working monitor and certainly will suit the purpose for our testing today. Now, unfortunately, our Sanyo in the museum only came with 1 disc, and that is the original MS-DOS disc. It seems to be a copy of it. It does have a handwritten label. As I understand it, it loads everything from the disc, including basically the equivalent of the boot up ROM. So here we go. We've got some video output. Looks like we've got something that's telling us the video RAM area of the system. It's telling us the version of io.sys. That is the file, I believe, that if it does not exist on the disk, the computer will not boot at all. One thing to note here is that this is a composite monochrome output. So on this particular monitor, it's going to show up in green. When we capture this, it's going to look white on black because that's just how we capture monochrome directly. So it looks a little bit different, but it's still easy to read, and it's overall a decent appearance for a monochrome monitor. So I'm excited to see what we can do with this. Now, this is MS-DOS version 2.11, but it is definitely not a standard version of DOS as I understand it. This was made specifically for the Sanyo MBC. I don't know if it'll have all of the standard DOS commands that you would expect from the time. I'm going to take a look at the contents of this disk very quickly just to see what's on it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the standard directory command. Let's see what we get on this disk. One thing I noticed right away about the Sanyo system is that there's a lot of extra time that it seems to take in actually reading the disk before it allows you to do anything at the prompt. I have read that this particular PC compatible system is one of the few systems that actually runs slower processor speed wise than the original PC XT. Again, there seems to be a lot of kind of freewheeling of the floppy drive, and then it will actually start to load something. Now we're starting to get a directory listing here. It appears that this particular DOS disk does not have most of the utilities you would expect to find. Now, that could be because this was a custom disk made for whoever had the system. They may have been using it for a specific purpose. I have a feeling this may have been used in some kind of industrial control scenario, just based on the types of programs that we're seeing in the list, but I'm really not familiar enough with any of this to say definitively what any of this does. Some of you out there may be, so please leave a comment if you use one of these systems. Maybe you know these programs. Now, speaking of software specifically for this, we did receive a nice set of 4 binders that came with the system. These were for the original software, but sadly, none of the discs were actually in these binders. We had the operator's guide binder, which has a lot of info on the system itself. We had the guide to the MS-DOS version, the 2.11, and then we had 2 other software packages that appear to be adapted from maybe the CP/M world, which is WordStar for word processing, CalcStar, which I assume is for spreadsheets, and EasyWriter1, which I assume is another word processor. We don't really have any other software for this system. Our technician, Justin, actually worked very painstakingly to get other software that we could try on the Sanyo system, which was very challenging because he had to actually create these disks from old image files. They are not standard DOS compatible disks. There are some slight differences. So you have to create these from a low-level format. Getting the right version of the original converter software to do this was a challenge. Getting a drive that would write them properly was a challenge. It was a road that was full of a lot of obstacles along the way, but definitely want to thank him for all of his work on this, because we do have 2 pieces of software that will load now, and we're going to get into the first one of these in just a second. It's actually a game that is called Larn. That is all I know about it, so we're going to put the disk in and see what happens. Let me move over to the B drive here. It does seem like the behavior of the idling drive happens on both A and B drives, so it must be something inherent to the system, not the drive itself. Waiting for the disk to load. Yeah, it's so weird. It's like it just sits and spins for, there it is. It looks like we've got a games directory, so let's check that out. Seems like with this system in the office environment back in those days, that this would have been a great example of a machine where you put the disk in and you hit load and then you go get yourself a cup of coffee and come back in a few minutes, because there's a lot of load time here. All right, and I do see the Larn exe file in here. Let's see if this will load. Not a bad rhythm right there, honestly. Welcome to the game of Larn. At this moment, you face a great problem. Oh no. Your daughter has contracted a strange disease, and none of your home remedies seem to have any effect. Time ago, you heard of a land of great danger and opportunity. Perhaps here is the solution you need. The caverns of Larn, it is thought, must be magnificent in design and contain much magic and treasure. One option you have is to undertake a journey into these caverns. Good luck, you're going to need it. Well, this is already starting out in a fantastic way. I have to say, the opening paragraphs of this game definitely have a feel like the video game from the movie Big. I feel like there's going to be an ice monster in a cave somewhere. I don't know why. I just feel like that's coming at some point.
With luck, you will thaw in several million years. Great.
And by the time the floppy disk was loaded, every creature in the land was dead. Oh, okay. Well, we have a screen here that I assume is representing something. We have basically a grid of dots. There are some letters spread out and the various dots on what I guess must be a map. We've got some info here at the bottom. I don't know what any of these mean. I feel like this is probably a game that had a rather detailed technical manual to tell you what all of this does, and I'm definitely flying blind here. Interestingly, there's no actual arrow keys on the keyboard. It looks like they're part of the function of the number pad, so I don't know. Let's just see if I can... Okay, so the arrows do move the cursor around. Let me go over to this V, see what happens. Aha, so it's asking me a question here. Do you climb down or ignore it? Onward? Is that supposed to say onward? Let's climb down. Oh, it does change the text. Okay. So do I hit enter here, or is it? Oh no, it's going to do it. Okay. So now we've got a changed map here. I assume this is now vertical movement, or maybe we're in a lower level. All right, we're going up. See that we're just kind of building the map as we go here. That's kind of cool. Oh, now we can go left again. Okay. Ooh, what's a Y? The yellow mold hit you. Oh no. Wow, okay. So score 0, difficulty 0. Keith Decker killed by a yellow mold on V1. I guess Keith Decker was whoever was the either creator of the software or just someone that was on the disk. It never prompted me for a name, so I'm not sure. Apparently in a previous playthrough, Keith Decker was killed by a tooth fairy. It's a heck of a way to go. Gingivitis. In any case, because of the excessive load time in this game, I'm probably not going to get further into this today, but I do want to come back to this at some point because it seems like a really clever way of having an adventure game that has text elements and storyline, as well as some visual representation with a map and being able to move around and kind of traverse through different levels. And now I will suffer a death that will be lasting the ages thanks to the floppy disk load time. The only other piece of software that we were able to get a working disk for was a program called Picasso. Now this is for working on art and drawing and that sort of thing. I'm really curious how this is going to work on a machine like the Sanyo though. We don't have any kind of a mouse or pointer device. There appears that there could have been a joystick port on the back of the system, but ours just has a filler plate in it, so I'm not sure how you would control anything for painting and drawing, but I am planning on finding out, so let's give this a shot. I think it's possible with the floppy disk load time on this that you could actually build a time machine, go back to Picasso's time period, and then come back to the present with actual art in the time that this program loads. Welcome to Picasso, the graphics workstation, copied by ESP. Additional thanks to Harry, quote, "Be bold and creative," Lafnir, Jim, "Oh no, where's my picture," Curry, and Gordon, "Isn't it done yet," Monier. Well, I like their sense of humor so far. That's pretty cool. I'm kind of impressed by this already. This is on a monochrome image, and we have kind of a whole toolbox here on the right-hand side of the screen. The resolution looks good, and you can really see what all of these are. Now, I'm assuming I'm going to use the arrow keys to kind of move through these. Yeah, this looks pretty advanced, honestly, for the time. I think the date was 1984. Let's try brush. So if I hit enter on any of this, oh, and you've got a brush menu. Looks like we've got a lot of different brushes here. Kind of like this one that looks like a star. So let's see what happens here. And you've got some values for X step, Y step, brush size, and density. I don't know how to actually make this go on the screen. And I do see the brushes selected down there. It's got the star next to the ×1 and at 100%. I really appreciate the erase icon. It looks like a skeleton. It's probably not what it's supposed to look like, but that's definitely what I see. Let's see what some of these other menus look like. Maybe we'll get a clue. Like if I go into line, oh, PF1, draw lines using pixels. PF2, draw line using current brush. Let's try PF2. Now, am I actually moving this? Oh, cool. I assume that there's probably a command to drop the pen or something. Enter. Oh, there we go. And it's giving the coordinates across the bottom too as I'm drawing the line, which is pretty neat. It does not seem like it's actually drawing using the current brush though, because I chose a star. Oh, interesting. See, I thought that if I would have hit the down arrow from that point that it would have started a new line, but in reality it's actually just modifying the existing line. So if I hit enter again, will that complete the line? Oh, and it did draw it with the star. Huh. So if I use it just using pixels, we go back to PF1 here. I'm going to try that. And this time I'm going to just draw a vertical line. Okay, and that's just the pixels. Interesting. How does the eraser work? You can erase the screen with any color you choose. Well, in my case, there's only 2 colors, so I guess it's going to be just black in this case. Oh, well, that just erased the whole screen, so very efficient. Let's try to draw a rectangle. So we've got a rectangle up here at the left-hand corner, and you can move it, and it draws using the current brush. Okay. All right, so I'm moving my rectangle around. Now, if I want to change the size of the rectangle, that's PF2. Okay. That works like I would expect it to, expanding the size of it. And you can go left or right. It's a little slow, but it definitely seems functional. Like, you could do a lot with this, even being a DOS-based system with no kind of mouse or pointer. And it looks really good in this particular graphics mode with the monochrome, because it has pretty good resolution. I don't know if we have a current pattern, but it says that PF3 is to move rectangle and fill with current pattern. Yeah, and it just fills it with a color, or absence of color. I'm not sure how you phrase that in monochrome world. I wonder what kind of stamps it has. Oh, interesting. So you could actually make your own stamps and then use those to kind of layer on, it looks like. There's a lot of advanced features here for this old of a piece of software for DOS. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the Picasso software. I know it doesn't necessarily have that much to do with the Sanyo hardware, but the Sanyo does a good job of running it overall. The load times are what really kills it, and that seems to be its biggest weakness across the board, but the machine seems fairly capable once you actually have the programs loaded into memory. And it's possible that there may be some setting that's making the floppy drive seek time or load time or whatever's happening there that could make that better. I just don't know that much about it to be able to tell if there's a way we can improve that or not. But it's really fun to kind of take a look at this early PC compatible. It was famously the first one, I believe, that was under $1,000, and for the price point and the compromises that had to be made, I think it's still a respectable machine. I'm glad we have one here in the museum, and I'm glad that we got a chance to play with it, and I'm definitely going to have to go back and try some more Larn when I have the appropriate amount of time to do so. Once again, a quick reminder, if you like vintage technology and vintage computers like the Sanyo MBC, be sure to like and subscribe. It's going to help us a lot as we grow. Also want to remind you to check out the Vintage Geek website and consider becoming a member. We have all sorts of video content and discounts on museum admission and more. It's all at vintagegeek.com. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.